Welcome to the August 30th live question and answer session for the Cameron Peak Fire. My name is Dawn Sanchez. I'm a Public Information Officer for Rocky Mountain Team Black. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Purpose of today's informal chat is to allow you to ask the Cameron Peak Fire leadership questions about the fire. This is meant to be a discussion about the overarching strategy for the Cameron Peak Fire and the things that have to do with the current management of that fire. The way this will work is we'll first have an overview of the fire by Russ Long, one of our operations section chief, and then we'll go into a question and answer session with our ICs, B. Day and Troy Hagan. You can type your questions in the comments section of the live feed, and I'll summarize the question and ask them of our incident commanders. If you don't see me on camera, you'll hear my voice. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the hour time frame that we have. So I'll be combining some questions of the same subject to help get through the questions faster. If we get very specific questions, like about a specific road or a trailhead, or questions that would be better answered by a cooperating agency or a person in a different functional area, we'll take those questions, note them, and then answer them after the session today. Now I'll allow our incident commanders to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about their role in the Cameron Peak Fire.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is B. Day. I'm the incident commander for the Portland NEMO team, and NEMO stands for National Incident Management Organization. It is a Forest Service team. We are comprised of 7 positions, and they are the command and general staff positions. And we are pretty much virtual. Although I'm tied to Portland, I actually live in just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have individuals from Texas all the way over to Alaska that are on my team and that are here. Now I have just one person, that is 2 people that are actually remote, but they are still assisting with this group. So I'm glad you're able to join and look forward to spending the hour with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Troy Hagan, Rocky Mountain Area Type 2 Team IC, Team Black. Our team is comprised not just of Forest Service folks. We have ADs, we have state folks, we got other cooperators, other agencies, BLM, Fish and Wildlife. So we're kind of a mixed group, but we come together as a team, approximately 57 members, and we just help support the firefighters out there on the line. The NEMO folks come with 7 command and general staff. We bring those folks, and in addition to that, like they'll have a finance section chief, we have that as well, but we will have a personnel time, equipment quarter, a personnel time person, an equipment time recorder, a cost unit, a comp claims unit, and then our log section is made up of ground support facilities, just to name a few. So with that, we're working in conjunction together to support the firefighters on the ground and manage this incident. Thank you.
Now I'll turn this over to one of our operations section chief, Russ Long, for an overview of the Cameron Peak Fire.
All right, good afternoon. Russ Long, and I serve as operations section chief on the Portland NEMO team. So I'm going to go over a few things, talk about the fire itself, talk about what we are doing around the fire, and explain how we're going about things. So I'm going to orient you first here with the map, and we're currently over here in Fort Collins, or Loveland. This is the Highway 14 corridor that travels up and does go through the fire. Cameron Pass just beyond. To the north, this is our indirect line. We'll talk about that. Crystal Lakes, Redfeather, Glacier View, places and names that probably you all know, and the Buckhorn drainage on the south end here. So we've been here for about 4 days. My role on the incident is to build a strategy, work with what we have, what's already been done, and where we can go to build a safe strategy that has a high probability of success. And so this fire is in a very difficult location. Been on many fires in the Rocky Mountains. This one is high elevation. It's burning at approximately 9,500 feet. Some of the things that go along with that on the Continental Divide is we have very difficult air, what there is of it, thin air. And then it's burning in a really complex, difficult fuel type. So we have lodgepole pine, mixed conifer. There are some meadows, but they're few and far between, generally in the valley bottoms and the ridge tops. And then beyond that, this whole area has been affected by the mountain pine beetle. So there's a high amount of dead standing trees that are essentially ready to burn. Now, one of the things that goes with that is in firefighting, there's some inherent hazards to doing it. We work often in steep, rocky terrain. We work in thick forests. But one of the things that firefighters that we are often limits our ability to do work is working around those snags. They become fire weakened. They're weak before the fire gets to them, and they fall very easily and silently. It's difficult for us to cut them down. They hide within the green trees, and this area is covered with those. Additionally, the high elevation and the thick fuels and the steep terrain is also another challenge for us as firefighters. So when this fire was initially attacked, they were unsuccessful. The fire got up and ran. There was no way to catch it. And so they had to back off to saving the structures in the 14 corridor. That continues and has been successful. The fire is currently kind of backing down the canyon. We keep up with it. When it gets around a structure, we prepare it by removing the vegetation, the trees, the brush around it. When the fire was the right time to do it, we'll burn around the structure. We have firefighters with engines and crews there that suppress it and keep it safe, and that's been a successful operation here. So when the first team came in, they started looking at, can we go direct? There was no way to do it between the fire behavior, the fuels, and the terrain. So then the next thing we look for is firefighters, we like to work on ridge tops and wide valley bottoms. That's where we can be most successful. Then we start looking for ridge lines. We're looking for places where we can put a line that we can do a firing operation or burn out from to create space between us and the fire so it can't jump over the line. So we start looking in close initially, and we start working back from there. We also look for road systems that we can use, which there are some, and we have utilized, and those can be difficult also. Many times they're on ridge tops and valley bottoms, but usually there's switchback roads to get them from one to the other. So the initial strategy has been to keep the fire off of the structures and look for that. So using the 103 road up to 4 corners and then across the top over towards Redfeather Lakes, improving a road system, connecting meadows, and straightening it out with heavy equipment, crews, and engines. So this line is nearly almost established, almost complete, probably will be totally complete in the next 2 days. And the question becomes, well, that's a long ways from the fire. Well, that's all we have initially. Inside of that, there's a lot of interior forest roads that we are starting to look at now to create a line closer to the fire to stop that spread to the north. Now, this isn't our area of largest concern on the north end, although this is where we have a lot of equipment working right now. Then the line comes over to the Manhattan Road out of Redfeather and drops down to Highway 14. This has been improved by hand crews, it's been brushed. We have plumbing in around the structures. Plumbing, I mean hoses and pumps and water sources in order to fight fire from there, and a line that's somewhat defensible. We feel good about most of that line. Some of it still needs to be improved, where we have corners that go through drainages, where we generally have trouble where winds come out of the canyon. Then from there, we get down to Highway 14. Well, that's when things start to get more difficult for us because we start running out of country that we can use that has those things that we look for. So we currently have improved the line down into Pingree Park. That has been prepared, brushing, taking out snags. We have to work around the power lines, prepare those to try to keep them from burning, and all the way down to Pingree Park. That's where we kind of run out of country to work from. Today's activities are we're working on finding a ridge off of the Crown Point Road that runs interior nearly out to the fire. And our firefighters have found a ridge and scouted it from Browns Lake up towards Comanche Peak up into the high country above timberline. So this is a really challenging task. It requires a lot of resources, heavy equipment, if we can use it, hand crews, and type 1 crews, which we currently are in short supply of due to the preparedness level of 5 and the competition for resources nationally. Up until yesterday, we've had 1 type 1 crew here, and they since have run up against their 14 days and are headed home for days off. We did get some more resources in today, a surge force that we requested, and they just came through camp a little bit ago and headed out to the fire to go begin scouting that task. So here's where we are with things. Because of the difficult terrain and where the fire is, we can't get up close to it. Now, when you look at the fire, this is approximately 23,000 acres. So what does that mean? It looks like an edge that maybe you could follow because on the map it's a straight line. That's not the case. What it really is large fingers that run out, and the way these fires spread is through spotting. So the fires will spot out like maybe 100 feet, maybe a quarter mile, maybe a half a mile. And depending on the terrain, if it's very steep, a quarter mile can drop it much further than that into a drainage. They're difficult to identify underneath the thick terrain. Even though we do have infrared, we can't pick them all out. So what might be around 160 miles of perimeter around the fire may be more like 300 if we were to try to go direct with all those hazards that are there. So because that's not a safe assignment for our resources and the hazards to firefighters, we are now at this point here and trying to move our lines closer to the fire. Right now, our primary area of focus, as I mentioned, is down here out of Pingree Park to the southeast. We have a thick bed of fuel from on the eastern side of the fire around Grass Lake that extends straight through Comanche Reservoir to Pingree Park that follows the drainage towards Buckhorn Summit and the Buckhorn drainage. So that's currently where we are. The question comes up a lot of times, well, there's a lot of helicopters here. How come you're not flying the helicopters? Well, we're not just gonna run out and run bucket work on it because the water can barely penetrate the canopy down to where the heat is underneath. In order for a bucket drop to be effective, unless we're just knocking down something around a structure to reduce the intensity, there needs to be a firefighter there to be able to put the heat out that's on the line. It may be helpful to characterize it as, you know how hard it is to put out your campfire when you leave your campsite, and it takes more than maybe a 5-gallon bucket of water just for a small area. So when you look at the amount of heat, spot fires, and the terrain that we have, it's just not feasible to do that. So I should probably talk about, well, what happens when the fire gets up and burns? What happens when the wind blows like today and when the fire starts moving? Well, we expect that to happen. Because there's a lot of miles between the fire and our lines, we have lookouts posted so we can identify when things do get active, and we have trigger points set for when we'll take an action on the line. Now currently, our intent with the indirect line is not to burn out this whole area. Our priorities are the communities and the structures and the watershed. So in order to do that, if the fire presents itself in a certain location, we'll take defensive action with our helicopters, with our firefighters, and we would do a burnout off of the line, a firing operation, to prevent the fire from spreading across the indirect line. Again, the lines are not complete. We're working towards that end right now and looking for additional strategies that are closer to the fire. I'm sure there'll be some questions that you have. Be here to help answer those as we go along. Hopefully that's helpful in understanding where we are with the fire and what we've been able to do thus far.
Thank you, Russ. So the first question I have for our incident commanders is, under what conditions, whether that be weather, containment, or other conditions, do you start to consider to reduce evacuation orders or extend or reduce closures?
Some of that has already started today with the recent precip that we got of allowing people back in on a temporary basis, and we're working very closely with the sheriff's office and our operations folks to make sure that the traffic impact on them will not impede their operations throughout the day. So we ask those folks that do get to come back in temporarily to please be careful with all the moving equipment and firefighters we have on the road. But again, it's a temporary let back or come back in, if you will. So they just need to be prepared that once it gets warmer and drier and this fire starts moving, we will be asking folks to please evacuate again.
Thank you, Troy. We have a question here about aircraft. Do we have fixed wing air tankers? And can you talk a little bit about some of the helicopters that we have as well and how we're using those?
Unless you want to do it. I was just going to ask operations to do that, to be more specific. Do you want them to come in here, or you got them there? Okay.
So we do have aircraft. As of yesterday, I think it was 12 or 13, we did reassign one aircraft to another fire. So the way the aircraft work is we have some that are assigned to the fire, and some belong to the region, and some are controlled nationally. So depending on where the priorities lie nationally has a lot to do with how many assets we have. So we have heavy helicopters, Sikorsky, Sky Cranes, maybe a common name that you might know. And then we have medium helicopters. Probably a common name would be a Huey that people would recognize. And then we have light helicopters, which are smaller, much more nimble, that we fly recon missions on, reconnaissance, and we fly overhead around to be able to assess the situation. As far as air tankers go, we're always in the pecking order with all the other fires. So if there's another fire, they're controlled nationally. They're pre-positioned around the country wherever the highest fire danger is. Initial attack is always the priority, so they will always get the retardant to keep new fires small. And then if we do need retardant, we will order it. We haven't used a lot because a couple different reasons. One, we haven't had a place where we can put a firefighter on the ground that needs it to stop the fire from burning. If we were to go out and start dropping retardant along this line, which there's areas that we're not going to do that because of some of the greenback cutthroat trout reintroduction and the water quality. But there are areas that we can use it. But without a firefighter on the ground, it really has no effect. What that retardant does is it will coat the fuels to keep an ember from starting new ones, but it does not put out existing fire that's on the ground. That's actually done by a firefighter with a Pulaski, doing the hard work, grubbing it out. So we can get it. We will request it when we do need it. There has been retardant used on this fire on the initial attack and the initial phases of the fire. But right now, we're not in a situation where it would help us with anything that we're doing.
Thank you, Russ. Next question I have is, are you guys planning to use this fire to consume some of the beetle killed trees, or are you going for a full suppression strategy?
Well, this is a full suppression strategy. We are looking at every options that we can implement, and Russ talked about that. We did look at the bigger box, if you will, because at the point in time we had another team was here prior to us coming in, and the conditions were such that they needed to look at the bigger box, so to be able to make a stand. And as we talked about, you're going to have wind events on this, so we want to make sure that we can position our firefighters in the best possible place to be successful out there. So that's why they're doing that. There was never intent just to let it go, to consume that by any means. And as I mentioned, we always have an eye on for any opportunities that we can to try and come in closer to the fire to take actions.
Thank you. So we've had several questions on fuel changes and fire behavior. There's been some talk on some of our daily videos of using the higher elevation in some of the tundra to slow the spread of the fire. We've also had some questions about what does a fire do when it gets into aspen stands. Can you touch a little bit on how fire reacts to different fuel types and how you can use those to benefit your work on the ground?
You bet. So those of you that are familiar with the high country and the Rockies, the Continental Divide, know that the top has many rocks across the top that really serve as a barrier. And we are using that here on this far west end where the fire is bumped up against that. There is aspen stands. There's not as many out there in this area as there is in some. The aspen this year, however, is burning. So many years the aspen can serve as a barrier, and we'll actually see an aspen stand and say that we can like pick it up right there and use that to take off from, or even as a safety zone. This year, that's really not the case because the fuel moistures are so dry. The problem is compounded even further. The last couple days we've had thunderstorms. We were fortunate to get even a third of an inch of rain that actually hit the fire. And so, our brains want to tell us, well, certainly that must help. Well, it does. It delays the fire, but the fire persists right through it. Because what happens is a log will be laying on the ground, a dead tree that has fallen, and the top of the log will get coated with the rain, and it'll be wet. But underneath the log gets no rain at all, and that fire will just burn right underneath the log and wait for that water to evaporate off, and as soon as that occurs and the humidity drops and the wind comes out, it will continue to burn. Even yesterday, when everybody was going inside from different rainstorms that were coming across the valley and off the mountain, there was trees torching on the fire. Our line supervisors reported back and our fire behavior analysts that there was torching on trees right through here. And that's just because the moisture doesn't get to the ground underneath the trees and it persists through, and as soon as it gets some air and it's ready to go and has available fuels, it will torch off and continue on. So it will take a lot more than several thunderstorms to hit it in order to have an effect on this fire. However, we are thankful for them because it gives us more time. It delays the advance of the fire. Hopefully tomorrow with the weather, we're forecasted to get 1/10 to 3/10 of an inch on the fire, which will give us some more time. But today we have 30-mile-an-hour winds, low humidities, sun shining, all the ingredients that a fire likes to be able to burn freely and move out. I haven't heard today that the fire has gotten up. It's still recovering or drying out from the rain that we had yesterday.
Thank you, Russ. The next question is going to be about wilderness. What kind of equipment can you use in the wilderness? And it's going to be two parts. First is what kind of equipment can you use in the wilderness? And the second question is going to be, are you doing anything to protect the wilderness?
So we have been planning and for equipment in the wilderness, mechanized equipment. It's just a variety of different types, chainsaws and masticators, what have you. There's a meeting later today with our operations folks and the agency administrators to go over that plan and gain approval to use different varieties of that depending on the field type. So it just depends on how heavy fuel we run into to what type of mechanized equipment we would use and have permission for.
Okay. Are you doing anything to protect the wilderness as far as fire lines or anything?
Always do the best we can and adhere to the light hand on the land when we can, where we can, and that's why we will only use the mechanized piece of equipment that we need to get that piece of line accomplished. And then, of course, we would come back in and do fire suppression repair afterward. But yes, we would take different tactics in the wilderness to be the lightest hand on the land that we possibly can, but still accomplish our goals.
Thank you. This question will probably go to Russ. Can you address some of the work that's being done on the south side of the fire, Division Whiskey, and the protection for Rocky Mountain National Park?
Right. Okay, good question. So this part of the fire right here has the least amount of activity right now, and part of that is because the wind has been blowing it back into itself. So what are we doing right now? Well, there's several structures that are down here on the state land that we've assessed. We don't have any boots on the ground out here per se, or anywhere else around the fire, and we're monitoring that area for growth. Now, how are we going to keep it out of Rocky Mountain National Park? That's a good question. I'm actually going to head over to the park tomorrow to meet with the fire management office over there, and we're going to look at some options. There's one saddle that the fire could potentially move through to get to the park, depending on the weather conditions and how things go. We're looking at a trigger point where we could use aircraft outside the park with retardant. We have what's called a mobile retardant plant that there's a chance that we could maybe hit that fire right as it thins out and goes through a saddle over a divide into the park. So we're going to go talk about that option. Right now there's some time and distance between that and Rocky Mountain National Park, but I'll be up there actually tomorrow visiting with them about that. Again, how do I characterize, so this flat map doesn't do a great job, and I wish I had a picture for you so I could show you, and we'll do that down the road here in the future and get some video. We're in Colorado. Many of you are skiers, so maybe this will do it. Double black diamond right there. The most difficult terrain and the most difficult fuels for a firefighter, just like the most difficult slopes for a skier. So that's how I would characterize what we're dealing with there. And yes, we are paying close attention to it. And no, we don't have anybody on the ground on that fire's edge right there.
Okay, next question is going to be, do you think that the fire will ever reach the fire lines that you guys built?
Well, we certainly hope not, but we want to be prepared that if it should make a push there. And again, as we want to give our firefighters the highest probability of success, and that's why we chose those lines, but we certainly don't want to use them. And that's why we're looking at options. We're not just putting in that line and just saying, hey, we're done. That's not what we're doing. And what Russ has said, we're looking at options to see if we can get in a little closer, at least to give, again, another line, if you will, in the sand to help our firefighters, that if we can take a stand there, that'll be great. And then if the winds push to the point where I understand that's how it happens in this country, you know, that line that they established already to the north will be that next line of defense.
Okay. Next question. If the fire contains itself into the area it is now, at what point do you call that contained? And is it the same if it burns itself out in rough terrain?
That is a great question. We get that one on almost every fire that we're on. And it's difficult for us to display on a map where a fire is moving and not, because right now we have the ability to show an uncontained line, which is a red edge, or a contained line, which is a black edge. So with that, for example, the far west side up against the divide is not moving. However, the line will remain red until we can call it contained and say for sure that it hasn't moved. Now, the general rule is we'll put a firefighter on the ground to verify it. If it's up against a rock slope, we'll probably be able to show that as black. We haven't yet. Don't anticipate showing containment on this fire in the near future. There may be some areas where it does rock out and that we might be able to put that black. But around this corner where we have indirect lines and the fire is still actively burning across the landscape, we will not put that edge as black or show it as contained.
So the next one's going to be for you too. Oh, yeah.
Okay. You know, the other thing is, and Russ said it, there's indicators, especially when you get into the high country and you've got aspen stands that are burning. To me, that's a huge indicator of the conditions that we're facing. And it's going to take a lot of effort to try and stop fire spread on that. But I just really want to highlight that, just the conditions that we have.
Thank you. The next question is, can you speak a little bit about some of the structure protection that is in place? Talk about what that means, kind of what is that work that's being done out there?
You bet. So outside of firefighter, public, and fire pilot safety, the structures are the number one priority. So what we do is we identify the structures that are at risk to the fire. We locate them. We work with the Larimer County Sheriffs. We have our personnel in communication. They're on the fire with us and also working directly with the local fire chiefs. So we have really good knowledge in the field of where the structures are. And so what we do is we assign, depending on what the need is, hand crews, engines, which we have those assets at the ready and doing that task right now. We put hose, we cut out brush around the house or take down trees that need to be taken down. We only take down what we need to do. And if you want to see what we use as a standard and you can do for yourself, go to firewise.org, and it has some great pictures of exactly how we create defensible space between a fire and a structure. And we use the same standard that you would use on your home as well because it works. So we put out hoses, we put down porta tanks, we'll call a water tender. If you have a creek, we'll use it. If you have a pool in your backyard, we'll take the water out of your pool. We'll put it back probably afterwards. We'll get the water wherever we need to save that structure and to save private property that's out there. We do structure defense, and we work with the local fire chiefs, and they do the structure protection. They are the experts on fighting structure fires, and we are the experts for doing the wildland fires. So we work in conjunction with each other, a joint effort. We have the same communication channels. We have the same terminology. We all operate off of ICS. They generally have blue pants, and ours are green. That's really the only difference.
Thank you. So we addressed the issue about the line stopping the fire. Is there a chance that that fire is going to cross that line?
Well, we have been doing extensive modeling on this the past few days and gotten some really good products, and there's always a chance. But the modeling has shown us maybe some areas where it may be more applicable to cross or not. So we're looking at that. To say no is not right, but we're going to beef up the lines where we think they need more power behind them to stop a front. And we don't anticipate a big front coming. It'll be drainage chutes and that coming toward the line. So that's the areas we're focusing on for reinforcement. But there's always a chance it could spot over any line. So yes, it's possible.
Thank you. Let's see. Find another question in here. So the structures between, and you may not know this, Russ, Spencer Heights and Fish Hatchery. Are you familiar with those? Can you speak to those structures a little bit?
Been up there a couple times. Yep, Fish Hatchery's right here. Spencer, I'm not familiar with, but I probably have on this map right here, but I'm not going to try to figure it out on there. But the structure's here, so we have, we call it a forward operating base. We're operating out of the Fish Hatchery. We have a caterer there. We call it a distribution point now. And so we've changed the way we do our business in the field, just like we have with our incident command posts. And in order to promote social distancing and to use the proper COVID precautions that we've been given from the CDC, what we do is we have the food that's delivered to a distribution point. Each crew will send somebody into that distribution point. They'll receive that food for their crew or their engine crew. They will take it back to where their crew is sleeping, wherever that point is. Sometimes it's in a park or an open area, a meadow, wherever the point is that they've chosen, so they have good separation from the other crews, and they'll get their food. So yes, the structures here around the forward operating base and hatchery, they've all been prepared. All of the structures moving down Canyon, all the way down to the Manhattan Road. The structure protection's been done and complete. There's always more that we find to do, but if fire moved this way, we're in a situation where we could fight fire without doing any extra preparation, and we're ready to go.
Okay, so the next question is going to be about utilizing volunteers on the fire line when we're drawn down on resources. Is there a chance that you could use volunteers out on the fire line, or could you use those to hold the line after that line is built?
You know, I would, with wildland, there are certain qualifications, and I know that gets into, but a lot of technical stuff. You know, we appreciate the ask on that. I would say that as far as volunteers, I would contact your local fire chief if you can. I think that's a really good way of trying to volunteer and help out the community. But as far as on the fire line itself, because all of our firefighters are highly trained, it takes a while for them to get the experience, if you will, and we want to make sure that you know, we you know, part of our task is to keep the public safe, and certainly we want to make sure that we don't put anyone in harm's way. And so with that, I would just say reach out to the local fire chiefs and see if that can you can get involved that way.
Thank you, Bea. Next question is going to be, how has firefighting changed in the COVID-19 environment? What changes are being made in camp, and what changes are being made out on the line?
Well, this is the third assignment for Team Black, and normally you're a big, tight, cohesive family. The crews are all eating together. You're in a chow line with 200 people. We've made many changes. We planned all spring for this, and part of that is, Russ mentioned, the forwarding operating bases. On all three incidents, we rarely even see a firefighter come into the incident base, because we're trying to protect them from us and protect us from them. So they're out there in these forward operating base or spike camps, and they live within their units. One person comes in and gets their food and takes it back to the rest of the firefighters, or they come self-sufficient. They cook for themselves for 5 to 7 days, like our Type 1 crews are doing in the Rocky Mountain area. Then 2 people will go back into town instead of 20 like the old days with a grocery list, buy the groceries, go back out and be self-contained for another 5 to 7 days. Now within the team, you know, the fear was of losing the family part of the team. I think we've managed to keep that. We're adapting. We're separate, where we used to be tight, like maybe all in one big room working, or just piled in yurts after yurt after yurt with a lot of people. The meetings, we've limited who can attend them. Everyone must wear a mask, and we try and keep the chairs in that 6 feet apart. And I would be remiss not to mention the digital world. So we're having community meetings and briefings just like this for you folks that normally we would meet in a park or a big community center and talk to you live. So that's just a few of the mitigations we're doing for COVID.
Thank you, Troy. The next question, we did talk about containment, but now if you can talk a little bit about the fire being completely out, and what are the steps that go through from containment to being officially declared out?
Well, as you know, we talked about before, being contained, I really think that is going to be, it's going to be a long time before you see the containment. And as far as being completely out, this fire may not be completely out or called out until, and certainly you have to have the local expertise in here too to know when it's going to be completely out. We've had fires, now I don't know necessarily around here, but I wouldn't be surprised, that have survived the winter and still are active in the spring. Now, I don't know that. It just depends on the conditions of the fuels that we find ourselves in. So I guess I'm not going to be hard and fast, or Troy and I are not, as far as with the containment, as far as the percent containment or when it's going to be called out. We'll just have to see what Mother Nature gives us in the future.
Thank you. We often get questions, and we've had some questions tonight, of how the locals can help the firefighters. Can you talk a little bit about the preparations that firefighters make before they come out to a fire, being prepared for 14 days, those kinds of things, and talk about how logistics is able to provide what the firefighters need as well?
So, like B said, the firefighters are well trained. We all travel with our red bags, our war bags, whatever they want to call them, but we have the supplies that we need. We got all the clothes we need. We have supplies in our forward operating bases so people can exchange their firefighting clothes, and they bring all their personal effects and that. It's just part of the training that everyone receives to pack, and you adjust your bag as the season goes. You'll have your summer bag, and hopefully you'll transition to your fall bag because it gets cold out there, and sometimes it's like, whoops, where's that stocking cap? So you just adjust as the season changes, and that's basically how we prepare to survive out in the elements. And then we'll adjust by, sometimes you spike out in just your sleeping bag, otherwise sometimes you bring tents, and that's how we're trained to do it.
Thank you, Troy. So the next question will probably go to Russ, and this is talking about some secondary line to protect power lines. Are you working on plans in place to protect some of the power lines?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have what's called a liaison officer that works here with the incident command team, and the liaison officer gets us in direct contact with the power company, and we get with their, usually it's the troubleman from the power company that comes out and shows us where the lines are, where the poles are, whoever it is from the local jurisdiction. We'll help in conjunction with that clearing. We'll cut out brush, we'll scrape lines. There's some poles out here along the Highway 14 corridor that we've wrapped with a silver blanket, much like a fire shelter, to keep fire from burning those wood poles. We'll do that if we can. We'll set up hose lines around them where it's reasonable to do so, but anything with the structures and infrastructure fit into that highest priority, that we do our best. Bridges or wood bridges out there, any of those things that are dependent upon for transportation and keep livelihood going on, we do our very best to protect to the extent that we can. Now, some of the ones that run out through the wildland up and over the top of the mountain, oftentimes we can't be there when the fire comes through. Oftentimes we don't have time to protect those before the fire gets to them. So it just depends on the situation, but we do the very best we can with the resources that are available.
Okay, the next question, if you can talk a little bit, and this has to do with, again, some of these COVID-19 mitigations. Can you speak a little bit to the module of one and what that means?
Sure. I think let's be clear too about how we're trying to deal with COVID. We're still trying to figure it out. We've done a lot of planning. Each team has done a lot of planning. I think each force has done planning, but there's still a lot of unknowns out there. So with each incident, each day that goes by that we're operating in this environment, we're learning a lot more. So the module as one concept is, you'll see hotshot crews, you'll see engine crews, you will see even finance sections will operate as a module as one, and that concept is that that's their group of people that they stay around day in, day out, if you will, and operate as one, so that as they go through incidents or go through day-to-day operations, that module will stay as one. And if one individual gets infected, comes up positive, then at least the module is one, we can do the tracing back to that unit and be able to test them, monitor them with that. Now, I will ask Troy if there's any, or Russ, is there anything else that you want to add in that, or did I explain that well enough?
I might just add that out in the field where the firefighting's being done and the work being done around the fire, a lot of it looks like business as usual, but the Module 1 really has changed things in a lot of different ways, the way that we work together with overhead. So if I drive out to the field to go meet with line overhead, the division supervisors and branch directors or local fire chiefs that are out there, oftentimes we'll just go get in a room or get over the hood of the truck with a map and just be right next to each other. So what's different now is we don't share pens. We'll oftentimes put our masks on if we're close by each other. If we're a distance and there's a breeze blowing, it's really hard to hear sometimes with a lot of the equipment working. We may not wear those if we know that we're in the sunshine and the wind is blowing in the fresh air, but we're really careful about our social distancing, which we know works, and crews not intermixing. So the crews stay in their own camps, their own sleeping areas. We don't share vehicles. The high-touch surfaces are things that we're paying attention to the extent that we can. Even such things like the portable restrooms that are put out around. So now we have people that they would just get cleaned maybe once a day. Now they're getting cleaned multiple times a day, and the high-touch surfaces are getting wiped down where their multiple users might be using them. So we are taking the precautions. I won't kid you, it's difficult to do, especially when it's smoky and it's hot and you're out there, but people are doing a great job of implementing the behavior changes that we all need to make together.
Russ, don't sit down yet. So the next question, we've had several questions about the scouting. A lot of folks are hearing that we're scouting the area, and this is referring to the area south of Dead Man. Can you explain a little bit more about what scouting means and what they're looking for?
So whenever scouting, usually the initial work will be like on a map. Then we'll look from a road and we'll get in a helicopter, and a line supervisor, an ops chief, a branch director, sometimes a hotshot superintendent or a crew boss, depending on who it is and what they know. We'll also use the local knowledge. We'll talk to a local fire chief and they'll be like, I know there's this thing over here that we can use, or a local that we talk to that's from this country. We depend heavily upon that intelligence when we come in. So we'll get in a helicopter, we'll do an overflight, we'll look for terrain, fuels, places, anchor points that are a place that we can start and stop so that things connect. Then once we verify things from the air, once we know where we are, where we're going to go, then we'll do the ground reconnaissance. So that'll usually happen on foot. Firefighters with a pack and their tool, and then we'll have a lookout that's posted so that they're watching for the main fire to make sure that they don't get entrapped if they were out there, so people can see around what's going on. We're in communication with each other, and we have escape routes to safety should somebody need to find safety. And they'll ground truth the area, and we usually carry flagging on our belts, and they'll flag a line once it's been found. And then once a line has been flagged in, then we'll pioneer a line with either chainsaws or heavy equipment. And then after that, we'll expand that line with either additional crews or more equipment. And then the final steps are things like hose lays and all the things that we would use to hold the line. So it's all a step-by-step process, kind of like baking a cake. It's just putting in a fire line and finding the right ridge is a hard process, especially when they're few and far between, and the ones that are there sometimes don't connect where we need them to go to. The what? Oh, yeah. So we also utilize and are heavily dependent upon what we call resource advisors. They have fire line qualified resource advisors from the local ranger districts and forests, and they're awesome. And we work with the same ones year after year after year, as it seems like, and they do a great job. So they generally come from the resource field at the different offices, and they'll also come from outside the area. And they'll have what's called like a lead resource advisor that has the intelligence that can tell us what cultural sites are that we might be protecting, or special fish in the habitat, or whatever it is that we need to be sensitive to. And they'll work right with us, and they're fire line qualified, and they're really fit, and they get right out there and get after it, and they have a hand tool in their hand as well, and they'll be right with our heavy equipment or with our crews, and they'll be like, okay, there's this thing over here I flagged out, we're gonna do this around it, see what you can do, and we'll work to protect it to go left or right, or do something to protect a resource that has been identified that we're gonna watch out for. Earlier with the question, there was a question about like, what do we do in the wilderness? Well, to expand on what Troy said, in every firefighter's initial training and in their fire line incident response pocket guide that every firefighter carries is what's called MISS tactics, minimum impact suppression tactics. And so we have a list of things that we do. So we always try to do those anywhere we are, especially if we're in a wilderness area. So there's certain things that we can do to try to reduce the footprint that we might leave behind on a fire. And if we do, when we do, not if we do, when we leave a footprint on a fire, we come back after the fire and repair to the extent possible what we can put back to try to leave no trace.
Thank you, Russ. So this will be the last question. Can you talk a little bit about how firefighters get fed out on the line and in ICP, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the requirements that they have for food for feeding those firefighters?
You can take it if you don't.
Okay, hey, Dawn, can you just read that one more time?
Yeah, if you can talk about how we feed firefighters on the fire line, and a little bit about some of the requirements for the caterers to feed those firefighters.
Okay. So we do, the caterers that we have, they actually have a national contract, and they have to go out for a bid on those contracts, and they're probably good for 5 years, I would imagine. So feeding the firefighters we've got a lot of actually research that's in on that as far as the caloric intake. I would imagine, I believe it's like 10,000 calories, or is it more than that?
Can't remember.
I mean, it's a lot. So usually if people aren't working as hard as the firefighters on the ground, if they eat the same, and actually before COVID, we would eat the same food, so we would end up gaining about 50 pounds over the, well, okay, 50, it might be a little bit too much, but it's geared towards the firefighter on the ground and trying to keep them fed and keep them healthy out on the line. So it's a contract that is in there. Now if it's a smaller incident, there are smaller caterers, and that's usually most of the local units, the forests, will have a list of who's available for that.
Thank you, Beat. And so that's all the time that we have for today. I want to let you guys know that we do plan on having a formal community meeting in the next few days. We will post that information when we get it scheduled. And we also plan to do more of these live chat question and answer sessions with other leaders of different functional areas and cooperators for the Cameron Peak Fire. I'd like to thank you again for watching and participating in today's chat. And I'd also like to thank our leadership for taking the time today to answer the questions for the community. Thank you.